you, Mr. Chairman. As chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee, I take proposals to amend our founding document very seriously. This is the first time that this subcommittee has considered a constitutional amendment since I began chairing it in 2009. We are going to follow the regular order, as we should. It is important to recall that 100 years ago, most Americans, adults, could not vote. And even after the franchise was legally expanded, there was a violent, racist campaign preventing many African Americans from voting. It took 6 constitutional amendments, landmark civil rights legislation, and Supreme Court decisions to make the promise of one person, one vote a reality. We, in our time, must be constantly vigilant against threats to these hard-fought victories which were won with the blood and the tears of so many Americans. That's why we're here today, because the right to vote is under attack on 2 fronts. A well-funded, coordinated effort has made it harder for millions of Americans to vote, and at the same time unleashed a tidal wave of special interest and corporate money into elections to drown out the voices of average Americans. Now, opponents of our amendment say we're trying to repeal the First Amendment. They have it wrong. Our efforts would protect and restore the First Amendment and honor Americans' seminal right to vote. Our amendment would begin to undo the damage done by 5 activist, conservative Supreme Court justices who have rewritten and distorted the First Amendment. With decisions like Citizens United and McCutcheon, they've overturned a century of precedent to give a privileged clique and corporate titans the power to drown out the voices of ordinary citizens. 1 year ago in Shelby County, the same 5 justices gutted the Voting Rights Act, civil rights legislation that protects the constitutional rights of average Americans. Emboldened by Shelby County, even more Republican-dominated state legislatures are pursuing legislation in a shameless effort to restrict the right to vote. It's no coincidence that the laws they're promoting have a disproportionate impact on minority, young, and low-income voters. Now, during his confirmation hearing, we all heard Chief Justice John Roberts praise the right to vote as, quote, the right preservative of all other rights. He also pledged to be a neutral umpire, calling balls and strikes. But because of the judicial activism of Chief Justice Roberts and his 4 conservative allies, the right to vote of average Americans is now at greater risk than any time since the Jim Crow era. Fire hoses, growling dogs, and insidious poll taxes have now been replaced with a well-funded campaign to deny millions of the right to vote and a flood of special interest money drowning out the voices of average Americans. Our amendment would protect and restore the First Amendment by empowering Congress and state legislatures, the elected representatives of the American people, to set reasonable, content-neutral limits on the amount of money wealthy special interest donors can give to candidates. Overturning Citizens United by authorizing Congress and state legislatures to prohibit corporations and unions from spending money from their treasuries to influence elections. Our amendment will ensure that elections are a contest of the best ideas, a contest where mere mortals have the same chance to succeed as multimillionaires. That's why our amendment is supported by more than 60 diverse advocacy organizations and a majority of the American people, including more than 2 million who filed petitions with this committee. Opponents of the amendment argue that any limits whatsoever on election spending of the wealthy and corporations violate the First Amendment. They're wrong. Just as there's no constitutional right to buy an election, freedom of speech doesn't give anyone the right to violate or overwhelm the constitutional rights of others. Apparently, 5 conservative Supreme Court justices believe the wealthy and the elite have a greater right to free speech than ordinary Americans. By our vote today in this committee, we tell these Supreme Court justices they are wrong. Join me in voting to protect and restore the First Amendment and the constitutional rights of all Americans. I urge my colleagues to support Senate Joint Resolution 19.
Thank you.